I've got these ash mantles that I bought recently for a future project, but they're too big, so I'm going to be cutting them down, and I thought I would test out my bandsaw to see how it handles them. First of all, ash is a hardwood and it has a Janka rating of 1320. Now, I'd never heard of this scale before, but apparently it's the scale basically used to measure the hardness of different woods. The higher the number, the harder the wood is. For reference, cherry, which is another hardwood, has a Janka rating of 950, and English oak has a rating of 1360, so pretty similar to ash. So it's a pretty tough wood, and rip cuts, which is following the grain, are a lot harder and more taxing on saws than a cross cut, which cuts across the grain. The bandsaw that I've recently bought is the Lumberjack 12-inch professional series floor standing bandsaw. It's got a 1 horsepower 750 watt motor inside, and I've fitted this 19-inch 3 TPI blade, which is more suitable for rip cuts. So let's see how it handles cutting this ash. The timber is about 7.5 inches by 5 inches, and it's roughly 66 inches long, which is just over 5.5 feet. I've had to move the bandsaw to give me enough outfeed space, and I'm using my miter saw stand and some boards to act as an outfeed table at the same height as the saw table. This is just to make sure that the cut is controlled. Without this, the mantle would tip and probably break the bandsaw, or me. Right, so let's talk about how well the bandsaw coped. At first, I tried to cut the full thickness, running the mantle along the fence to keep things straight, but I was running into a lot of issues doing this. I had blade drift, and the fence wasn't always staying in contact with the mantle, or the mantle wasn't always staying in contact with the fence, and therefore it was causing some jamming issues. So what I then did is try to cut a relief cut using the track saw, because I thought it was an issue with the power of the saw not being able to cut through the full thickness. But it turns out what I actually think was the issue was the fact that these mantles don't have perfect 90-degree square corners, and each side isn't perfectly flat. So what was happening was the piece was rocking slightly on the table, and it wasn't always making full contact with the full face of the fence. You can see here that the mantle isn't sitting flat on the table, and the fence is only actually making contact near the top. After making these relief cuts, I then run the mantle through the bandsaw freehand without using the fence to see if that was any better. Now, I had to turn this over because, a bit like this board, the top edge where I'd done the relief cut wasn't flat, which meant the piece was still very much rocking on the table. So I flipped it over and marked on the other side where the relief cut had been, and then run it through freehand. But it actually turned out, which I didn't really think about at the time, because the track was flat against this side and because this wasn't a square edge, it meant the relief cut was also in at an angle. So it turned out that the cut that I ended up doing cut most of the way through in the majority of the section of this mantle. So basically the relief cut was a little bit pointless in the end. You can see here that the first foot or more doesn't actually even cut into the relief cut at all. After that, I decided that freehanding was probably going to be the way forward, so I just marked up along the middle and then freehanded it rather than using the fence, and this worked a lot better. Now, this obviously means that the boards aren't going to be perfectly straight, but this is quite quickly rectified using a planer. I had a quick go with this hand plane, as you can probably see from some of these shavings, and within 2 or 3 minutes I had one of the boards completely flat. As it happens, I also have a planer thicknesser on order, so that means I can use the planer and the thicknesser to get these boards finished off and make them completely square and flat. I definitely think in future how I'll go about cutting down stuff like this will be to freehand it using the bandsaw and then use the planer thicknesser to get things finished up and nice and square and flat. So how well did the saw really cope? Well, at first I thought it was having a nightmare and it was pretty much useless for a job like this. But in the end, I was actually really happy with how well it coped. All the issues I was having was down to the timber and it wasn't down to the saw. The blade was great and it had plenty of power to cut all the way through these 5 full inches of solid ash mantle. What I probably should have done is got a piece of MDF that I could have attached and shimmed this up against, and then I could have run that MDF along the fence as a perfect straight line, and that would have prevented any rocking and it would have meant the MDF would have run along the fence and kept everything perfectly straight. But we live and learn. In a couple of weeks' time, I'm going to be doing a full review of this bandsaw, so make sure you're subscribed and check that one out when it comes out. As always, thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next one.